bank it ahead. Kneckney tips it. He got it past the defenseman and gets to the puck. Kneckney cutting it on goal. He scores! A beauty from Kneckney, and the Flyers take a 1-0 lead. Beat the defenseman, then beat the goaltender. And Kneckney's third goal in the last 2 games has the Flyers on top.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. Hey, everybody, it is Isaiah. We are back. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode 141. We'll be with our panel in a second. Just a reminder, you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on Twitter. We have a Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel. Just plug in O&B Puckcast. You'll find us there. And if you could rate and subscribe on one of the 12 or 13 different podcast platforms, we really appreciate it. It helps move us up the charts. When people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts, it really helps out. So appreciate that very much. And next time we get a review, we're going to read it on the air. And I guess we'll have to live with what that is. But before we get rolling, one other thing, just a reminder, the O&B Puckcast and, of course, FlyersNittyGritty.com are brought to you by Jim South Street. It's 40 years of the best Philly cheesesteaks, hoagies, fries you could ever want in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. And if you're down by 400 South Street, make sure you check them out. If you live down there and you can't make it over, don't worry. They use DoorDash, so to get that delicious food right to your door. Either way, it's Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And with that, let's go with our panel. Chef is down for the count tonight. He's a little under the weather, so we'll catch him next time. Hope he's feeling better. But, of course, we always have with us tonight the great Dan Silver.
Hey, Isaiah, I'm just digging my way out here down in D.C. We got more snow today than I think combined we've gotten since I moved down here about 4 or 5 years ago. It's been, we probably got a foot of snow, maybe 12 to 14 inches.
Wow. We had a squall up here. Maybe it's headed up here.
Yeah, there was a ton. And we actually built a little snowman today. My partner, she's calling him Frosty the Snow Dan. We put a little Flyers hat on him, and yeah.
Very cool.
Anything you can do to keep amused. The Flyers don't offer us much amusement these days, so whatever we can do.
No, and we might need a competitor for Gritty. Dave
Frosty the Snow Dan might be able to take over for Gritty.
He might be. I mean, Dave Scott was in the hockey news. The latest Money and Power issue. And he was going off about defending Gritty. And he talked, I don't know, there was like a 2-page article in the hockey news. I actually have the hardcover or hard copy print. And, I think about 20% of it was the team and the rest of it was all the wonderful refurbishments and the amenities in the balcony, and they're in the entertainment business, and they hired Valerie Camillo because, for diversity, and then they got into esports and all the different sub companies and investments that Comcast Spectacor is in. I'm like, no wonder we're going through a decade of what we're going through.
They've got all that, but they still don't have a second line center.
No, they don't. Do they? No, they don't.
But hey, you know what? That just confirms my likely decision to turn in my season tickets at the end of the year.
Yeah. So let's get a breaking update for the folks through Bill Meltzer, Jackson Cates, Nick Seeler, and one staff member has been added to the NHL's COVID-19 protocol. And of course, earlier, the Flyers had Ryan Ellis, Scott Lutton, Carter Hart, and I forget who else. I know I'll find it too late. Oh, and Derek Brassard, who's still not healthy, were on the list, and they've been taken off. Expect to see Carter Hart and Scott Lutton on Tuesday versus the Ducks. Ryan Ellis, we still don't know what's going on, and Brassard has a hip issue. I mean, it'll be good. I think Cates was probably coming out of the lineup anyway with Lawton because Max Willman's been playing fairly well. Maybe he's a little bit overused by Mike Yeo, but, I don't wish him to have the COVID protocol, but he was probably coming out anyway, at least.
Yeah, I mean, Max Willman, it's funny. He's been one of the better stories on the team so far this year, just from a feel-good story of a guy who has had all these, various setbacks over the course of his, not young career. I mean, what is he, 25, 26 years old?
Yeah.
And, battled through, finally made it to the NHL, has got his first NHL goal. He's a decent player. I mean, he's a good skater. It's kind of like one of the more feel-good stories surrounding this team this year is the play of Willman. It's kind of been a fun one to watch play.
Yeah, I think so. Again, though, what it is the Flyers have this surplus of, little engines that could or overachieving players. I think Zach McEwen is playing very well. I think the fourth line is playing well for what they are. I mean, they usually lead the team in terms of Corsi. Of course, when it comes to expected goals against, there's nothing there because they just can't convert. And I'm thinking maybe at some point down the road, when the lines balance out, the fourth line will be able to chip in a goal here and there, which would be ideal, even though these guys are doing a good job in terms of at least controlling play.
Yeah, really quick to go back to the other guy you mentioned there, one of the guys, Ryan Ellis. Mm-hmm. And we did a show early in the season where I'd said that my big concern for what could really send this season off the rails and spiraling downwards was if Ryan Ellis is out long term. And clearly that is the case. Mm-hmm. What has he played 3 games for the team?
4 games, I think.
4 games. Yeah. So Ryan Ellis played 4 games for the team. And they said he was going to be out, 4 to 6 weeks. I'm sure we're already well past that timeline. Yeah. No one really will say what he has. There's been rumors of various different kinds of core injuries or hip injuries. And so today, Mike Yeo said that Ellis is out of COVID protocol, but there's no timeline for his return, which is not very good. And the quote from Yeo was, "It's just not making a lot of progress right now. Hopefully something changes there very soon." To me, everything that's happened with Ellis and sort of what's going on with the injury, and he hasn't made any progress in 2 months. I mean, doesn't it seem like something, whatever it is, that might necessitate some kind of surgical procedure to fix? Or, you hate to speculate, but what kind of injury doesn't get better in 2 months unless there's some additional type of procedure needed?
All right, I can think of one thing. I went through it. I had a hernia. I ended up having a double hernia, but it hadn't come out yet. In other words, it wasn't completely torn. And it's not like the type of thing where you can't win. Eventually, you're going to have to break that tissue, and they're going to have a reason to operate. Perhaps, and I'm just speculating, he has the makings of an almost hernia. I was in pain for about 8 months, and then finally they diagnosed the hernia. And they said, yes, but they couldn't do it before. They can't. It could be the type of thing where he has a soft tissue injury that doesn't require surgery yet, and he'll have to injure it further for them to justify going in there. Of course, I was just
sounds horrible.
It was like you're in purgatory.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a medical professional. I don't know, I don't know about that. I just, just not that hard to tell from how it's been handled and what they've said that this is something that clearly is has the potential to keep him out at least for the rest of this year. Or if he comes back, he may re-injure something. Who knows? But that continues to be a major blow for this. I mean, you could argue that they're probably Provorov's their most important defenseman, but everyone kind of takes him for granted because he never gets injured. He plays every night. But aside from him, Ellis is obviously the most important D-man. And then you look at who the most important forward is on this team, and it's probably Sean Couturier, who I think since we did our last show has since been put on the IR with upper body injury. Not sure exactly what's going on with him, but with those two guys out, those are two fairly big blows for this team to overcome.
That's two of their five best players. I don't think there's any question. And, the way Provorov is performing, he looks like a plug-in add-on kind of complementary defenseman. He's capable of playing first-line minutes. I think we both agree, but he's not the guy who carries the mail. He needs someone to lift him, and I think we were hoping for more out of that player. Yeah, before we get too far into the trends, let's just catch up on some housekeeping in terms of the Flyers. They had a 7-game point streak, which ended Saturday night with the loss versus the LA Kings, a very uninspiring game to say the least. Showing up again, kind of like in the third period. The COVID-19 protocols are kind of going through, it's a very fluid situation, or the NFL has kind of led the way in maybe changing some things. On the other hand, we had the World Junior Championship where they just had to call it quits because they just couldn't control the cases. So this is reality in 2021, in 2022. But any comments in that regard?
Yeah, it was tough to see the World Juniors cancel. I know that Canada sort of has a different set of restrictions, and it's these times are difficult for everyone on a number of various different levels. And so it's tough to, I don't know. It's society just it's been 2 years now that we've been dealing with COVID and a lot of the ramifications and the restrictions. And, I understand a lot of it. I don't understand other parts of it. It seems like the NHL is doing a fairly reasonable job of figuring out a way to sort of keep the season going, while also dealing with it in a way that's, I guess, socially responsible or, I don't know, politically responsible. I don't know what the right terminology would be. But obviously the Olympics was a big thing with now NHL players not going to the Olympics. I mean, there's a lot of players who are kind of vocal about that. Logistically, it seemed like it was just kind of going to be a bit of a nightmare. But, hopefully with all these players that have been in COVID protocol recently, hopefully that'll sort of insulate them from not dealing with it again the rest of the season. But it's I think, no matter what people think about it, I think everyone is sort of on the same page. We just want it all to be behind us.
Sure, absolutely. And the thing that concerns me a little bit is the testing is not very accurate. So we could go on with a testing thing where we don't actually have a pandemic thing or an endemic thing, but we have a testing problem. So I hope they can, get that together so we don't have a bunch of false positives gumming up the works. So let's take a step back. The Flyers are 5-3-2 in the 10 games since Mike Yeo took over. We've seen some positive changes. We've seen a lot of the same old. Right now, as things stand, after 32 games, they're 13-6 for 32 points. They are 2 points out of a playoff spot behind Boston, but Boston has, 4 games in hand. Detroit is ahead of them, and the Flyers have 1 game in hand on them. They're 1 point behind them. And Columbus has 2 games in hand. They're only 1 point behind the Flyers, and the Devils are right there. I wouldn't count the Islanders out just yet, although they seem to be having a calamitous season. But the Flyers are no guarantee to make the playoffs, and that would be considered a really big deal. At least it was before the season began. Dan, we're at a decision point now. I think it's, again, and when we talk about this more than we wanted to, at what point, what is that threshold where Chuck says, I have to, do my business to get off the pot here in terms of how far am I going to push the chips all in to make a playoff spot versus, hey, this ain't working. Even if we do make the playoffs, I haven't seen a lot of promising things here.
Yeah, I mean, in a vacuum, I think that the choice is obvious. You need to start making moves that are geared towards the future and a rebuild. I mean, look, first of all, I'm sorry, but I'd say there's, less than a 5% chance that this team makes the playoffs. You look at it, okay, who's ahead of them right now? Tampa, they're not catching. Florida, they're not catching. Toronto, they're not catching. The Caps, the Hurricanes, the Rangers, they're not catching. So that's six teams that are clearly out of reach, that they're not going to catch. Then you look at the Penguins, who are 9 points up with a game in hand and are going to be getting healthy soon. They ain't catching the Penguins. That's 7 teams. Now, the only conceivable team left is the Bruins, who, as you mentioned, only have 2 more points than the Flyers. But, again, they've played 4 fewer games. So if you look at the points percentage, the Bruins' point percentage is 60%. The Flyers is 50%. And we know that the Bruins are a better team, quite honestly, a better franchise than the Flyers right now. So the Flyers ain't catching the Bruins. There's basically no shot that this team is making the playoffs. The problem is, and this has been the problem for the past many years, is that you look at it and it's easy to kind of talk yourself into, and not us, but in management and Dave Scott, easy to talk these people into the fact that, oh, we've got a playoff shot. No, you don't. And you're just going to be stuck in the same situation where the Flyers are going to be picking somewhere between 10 and 14, 10 and 15 again, hoping to either win the lottery, and although we did that and we got Nolan Patrick, or maybe strike gold with a pick around the 10 range and get some guy who's going to be a superstar. But right now, I mean, in a vacuum, I don't see how Chuck Fletcher can think anything other than I need to start making moves for the future. The problem is that I'm sure he has pressures from the organization to not do things like approach Claude Giroux and see if he would waive his no movement clause, or, start trying to move any expendable pieces that you can for the future, which is what they need to be doing right now. Right. Of course, on the flip side, the problem is that there's teams like the Kraken and the Coyotes and the Islanders and the Canadians and the Senators and the Sabres, who they're not going to be worse than no matter what they do this year. So what, I guess, from a draft position, you're looking at maybe getting up into the 7-8 range is the most you could probably hope for, even if you start trading away some of the good players. It's a very bad situation this franchise is in right now. But I think that, you really do need to start selling off pieces, see if Giroux will waive his no movement clause. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not, because of organizational pressures, but it certainly needs to.
Well, it's hard to argue. I mean, just pulling a stat from Jay Fresh, I mean, the Flyers are 32nd on 5-on-5 expected goals against per 60. So almost goals against. I mean, it's just rotten.
They're not a good team. I mean,
they're not a good team. I mean, it's just like, I'm trying to point to that. It's like, what is one thing what was the hallmark of the success of the 2020 squad? It was the reduction from the year prior in goals against. And that was the goal that he had at that time. And it seems as if there was a lot of the same theme behind this offseason, but more aggressive, changing not only the defense, but also like the character and the makeup of the team. And yet we see so many of the same things. First, they were coming out hot in the first period in the beginning of the year. And then the second periods were horrible. The last few games that they played, they didn't show up till like the last 5 minutes, really. They would just have, spurts of play, and they can't get the puck and hold on to it and have long stretches of possession where they're driving the play, then none of that exists because there's so many chasms in their lineup. The third pair's a mess. Yandel is leaking oil. That's a whole soap opera in terms of his streak and versus him really needing to get the hell out of the lineup. And missing a guy like Couturier, and like I said, 2 of the best 5 players are out of the lineup. So that's where they're at right now.
I mean, take the goalies out of the equation, and this team's probably worse than they were last year, which is a very scary thought because, as I've cautioned people at the beginning of the season, Martin Jones is very streaky. He'll string together a few good starts, and then he'll look horrible for a few starts. And that game against the Kings, he didn't look all that good. So, you're going to need Carter Hart to come back and play like he's, I guess, been playing all year. But I love people talking about the 7-game point streak. I mean, it's basically fool's gold for the most part if you look at the games. I mean, the Vegas game, that's one of the worst games that Vegas has played in a long time. They got lucky against Vegas that Vegas just didn't come out and play. Then they beat Arizona, who stinks. And then the Devils, who have not been playing very well recently, they played a really good game against the Devils. But again, Devils not looking all that good. Then the next 4 games all either went to overtime or a shootout, and it was against Montreal, Ottawa, Seattle, and San Jose. So, it's it's depressing right now to look at, and it's Yandel. I mean, it'd be great to get a look at Cam York or Egor Zamula, but God forbid they take Yandel out of the lineup because he's going after the NHL Ironman streak, which is a whole other topic of debate.
Yeah.
How far is he away from that record?
I don't know. It's like I don't care. Like I'm so much into I don't care mode with regard to Yandel because I mean he is such a liability, and he did make 2 plays, but it was in the I think it was in the Seattle game. Or the San Jose game. I forget which one it was, where he set up 2 goals. I said, you get the worst of Yandel most of the game, and then he makes 2 plays where he makes a good keep and then a breakout pass that leads to a goal. It's all a blur right now because really they're getting outplayed like 80% of these games. Like just for example, the Seattle game, right? They were outplayed really until like the last 5 minutes. And lucky to get the extra point. And then that was a really nice goal by Provorov and really nice feed by Hayes, 3-on-3 to break them. And Jones had a really good game that night. And I should say, Jones, in terms of goals expected, allowed versus expected, he's even right now. So right now, he's pretty much what we expected from him. He's like a .906 percentage or something like that. I mean, he's a typical backup goalie. Is a 3.36 goals against. And listen, if you count on him a game here and a game there, he can pull out a game. He's probably as good or better than what we got from Elliott last year. But then they find out that Couturier's on the IR retroactive to the 18th. And we go to the San Jose game. I mean, Sandstrom stops. And now this is a topic at least you can get excited about because I know you've liked this player for a long time, and we all know goalies go wild. He stops 43 of 46 shots in a game the Flyers should have lost by probably 5 or 6-2 instead of 3-2 in overtime.
Sandstrom was certainly my favorite moment of the last little while. He's a guy who you look at his track record. He was drafted in the 3rd round in 2015 by the Flyers. And, I mean, he was a really promising young goaltender. He was playing in the top Swedish league from a very young age. He was one of the best goalies at the World Junior Championships in 2016-2017 season. He was terrific. At one point, I was doing the yearly Flyers prospect list, and I had him ranked ahead of Carter Hart 1 spot, which probably was a faulty ranking on my part, but just the fact that that I could consider him in the same category, says a lot. The one thing, and Charlie O'Connor used to caution me about this with Sandstrom, was that he never really put up big numbers in the professional league he was playing in, the Swedish Hockey League. He was always just kind of okay, and the people, you'd look at him and you'd say, well, he's a young goalie playing in a professional league. and so he'd sort of get a pass because he was great in the World Juniors, and some of the other leagues he'd been playing in before this Swedish hockey league, the SHL. And then he kind of started having some health issues. He had something that people were talking about as a hiatal hernia, which is not a hernia that it's not the commonplace type of hernia you think of. But he was having different health issues. He missed half a season one year and then a quarter of a season the next year. And then he finally got over to the U.S. And really wasn't playing all that well in the AHL. Even, through this year, he really hasn't played all that well in the AHL. You look at his numbers, and it's just kind of happenstance that he ends up getting called up to the NHL of Carter Hart in COVID protocol. Sandstrom's 24 years old now. So, I guess goalies can develop later, but probably not a top prospect any longer. But he gets up, he gets to play in that game. People like me who have been talking about him for a long time finally get to see him play, and he was terrific. I mean, he was a franchise record in saves for a debut. What did he make? Like 46 saves?
Yeah,
46 saves.
Well, 43 saves out of 46 shots.
Yeah, 43 saves out of 46 shots, franchise record. Obviously, not a record that the team wants to see happen. You don't want to have a debuting goalie face 46 shots, but he did, and he played very well. I still don't know how good of a goalie he's going to be moving forward. But as a moment, it was kind of really nice. It was sort of like when Sam Morin scored that big goal for the Flyers last year, just kind of like a really good, feel-good moment. And those are few and far between with this franchise right now. So it was good to see Sandstrom play that well.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I'd say he's really having a down year. His numbers weren't very good in Lehigh Valley, but from what I've heard and I've seen – a little bit of the Phantoms action. We all know it was a train wreck down there, and they're on some kind of winning streak right now. I think 7-game point streak or something, and they're actually earning it. Unlike the Flyers, the process behind what they're doing is much better, which is good to hear. The Flyers, I will say, in San Jose, I'm looking at some of the notes I took here. One of the things the Flyers didn't do versus Seattle is generate really good chances. I mean, they were high danger chances versus Seattle, 7-1 against. At least against San Jose, it was more even. So, it was a little more action in the heat map and things like that. So, and then it's like, okay, they're getting to the net, but still giving up that many shots is ridiculous. And again, it speaks to, Dan, the fact that they can't gain possession and have periods of dominance. It's one thing to have some ebb and flow in games. They're getting dominated most of the time, and we saw that versus Los Angeles. Again, first 2 periods outplayed, and then the third period is more like score effects. LA's just kind of taking her foot off the gas. And the highlight of that particular game was the 5-on-3 power play where Mike Yeo decides, you know what, I'm pulling the goalie. Kevin Hayes comes on the ice. You get to feet and puts the puck right in the net. But, I mean, that's right there with Sandstrom, and the Morin goal from last year. It's like these few and far between. They let us feast on scraps. Yeah, and this part of the schedule is probably the softest part of the schedule for the Flyers all year, as we mentioned. I mean, they're playing against the Coyotes, the Devils, the Canadiens, the Senators, the Kraken, the Sharks, and the Kings. Now things are going to start to get tough again. They're going into Anaheim. Anaheim has been one of the best teams in the Western Conference this year. They've been a real surprise out there. And then they got the Penguins. They're home, and then they got the Penguins and the Sharks. The Sharks are okay. They skated circles around the Flyers last time. But then you get into the Hurricanes, the Bruins, the Rangers. And then it gets a little softer again. But, this was the part of the schedule where the Flyers needed to get some wins. They got some wins, but yeah, it's not going to be pretty unless they start playing better. And I'm not sure if they can do that until some of these guys come back. Yeah, and you notice that while they're out west here, you notice that the formerly heavy West is more skill and speed than the Flyers. And that's alarming for all the drafting that the Flyers have done, and they're going to run into more skill and speed with Anaheim, a formerly heavy team. And it just speaks again to the draft position, the kind of players and decisions they've made. And it's frustrating to have this the half rebuild that we've referred to a million times with Hextall, and yet here you see a guy like Trevor Zegras. Man, he's such a dynamic player, and who was on L.A. making plays? The young kid there, not Newhook. I forget. I better check the roster, but and I just saw guys that just really are. Like LA has been sitting on some players and prospects, and it's starting to come together. And they didn't get anything yet from Byfield yet, And
LA's just got a plethora of
Turcotte. Yeah.
Turcotte, yeah, and Turcotte's a guy who actually was drafted highly and then didn't look that good for a couple years, and actually slid down the prospect list, and he still looks pretty good. And you look at the Ducks. And you talk about Trevor Zegras, where he was. I'm just looking up now when he was taken. He was taken 9th overall, and was that the Farabee draft, or was that the? Oh no, that was the Cam York draft, maybe.
Looking that up right now. Yeah,
that was the Cam York draft. Zegras goes 9th. Just another year where maybe if the Flyers were a little bit worse, maybe we would have had a chance to get a Zegras, right? Like those are the kinds of superstar game breakers that this organization needs to have. And they just haven't drafted consistently high enough to have a legitimate shot at getting guys like that.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because particularly at those positions at center where they really need it. And whoever remembers the Flyers needing centers, they always had centers. Until the last little bit, the current regime just tried to draft him. They draft a guy like Rupsov. That's a whiff. And we all know about Nolan Patrick.
Hextall drafted a ton of centers, and pretty much none of them worked out.
Unbelievable. And we talk about how good their drafting was for years, and they're nice players. You don't win anything big with what they've done. But
yeah, and the big irony could be that this organization has been trying to find a franchise goaltender for a long time, and now we may finally have one, and the rest of the team's not there to support him, and we may actually have to go into kind of like a rebuild,
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's not all bad news. There have been. Well, I'm just going to get on one player. Travis Kneckney is in the midst of a 17-game goalless streak. He hasn't scored since November 18th versus Tampa Bay. And when he does finally get that goal, it will be his 100th NHL goal. So he draws a 10-minute misconduct for running his mouth, just probably out of frustration. Now, there's a guy with a skill set. He can play with pace. He can get in with a possession and make a play. And he makes really nice passes. Was he? I think he was a center in juniors. I could be wrong, but
he played some center.
Yeah, I mean, you can see some of that, and it's so frustrating to get so little goal production out of him. Even though he's still up there among their points leaders. Travis Kneckney, 5 goals, 14 assists, and 19 points in 32 games. That has him 4th on the Flyers, but still. It's really not fulfilling of a guy you thought would be a steady 25 to 30 goal scorer.
Kneckney was a guy who you look back at like 2019, 2020 season, 61 points in 66 games, and just the skill set. And you're thinking to yourself, hey, this could be a guy that could develop into like a Brad Marchand type, which, I don't think was insanely outlandish to think that was among the realm of possibilities. I don't know what's happened since then. I can speculate on various things. I don't know if we've, talked about this before. I mean, I know that last year some of Carter Hart's struggles were, from what I've heard, due to like real things happening in real life, right? These kids are young and they go through things. Travis Kneckney, again, you hate to speculate, but he just had his first kid at a fairly young age. I don't think him and his girlfriend were married until after they had the kid. These things, I think we forget that like this, and maybe that had no impact whatsoever. But I see stuff like that, and I think to myself, it's probably hard to be going through stuff like that during a time when COVID is happening. And I can't I can't stop thinking maybe stuff like that has something to do with it. And then I start thinking about, okay, well, if there's a young kid sort of going through stuff like that, shouldn't there be someone in the locker room that is kind of talking to these players and kind of working with them on this kind of stuff and helping them with some of life's challenges? And that's where I'm not sure that there is. And, I don't know, not to get too philosophical about some of this stuff, but, it's just some stuff that I can't help but sort of think about, like Claude Giroux might be a great leader on the ice and the guys want to go to war for him, but are some of these young players getting the support that they need from the older players? I mean, I remember there was a report last year from one of the highly respected hockey columnists out there speculating that there was a divide between the older players and the younger players in the locker room. So, I can't help but wonder sort of if there are issues and how they kind of have led to some of the struggles that this team has had over the last number of years.
It's hard to say, everybody in the league, every team has had to deal with these issues. It seems like the Flyers, what it is? I think it's that the Flyers have not been known as a team that had a strong spine, that had a strong identity and culture. And a lot of it eroded after 2012 when Pronger went and he was hurt and he left the lineup and that left a void. And I don't know that G was really the best choice at that time to be the captain. I know a lot of is made of it. I don't look at it in that regard now, but I think there's a cultural issue. And to me, it always comes from the top down. You look at organizations and why you said earlier about the Bruins and how they're a good organization. That ownership is considered a little stodgy and whatever. But I'll tell you, you see the way they deal with the players and how long they've had a winning tradition. Even since they made that lousy trade and got rid of Joe Thornton and got 3 players and it didn't really work out. It was Mike O'Connell. I think it's now with the Flyers. Well, gee. Anyway, but after that, when Chiapek came in, Peter Chiarelli, and they started their run in 2010, 2011, and they've been on a roll ever since. How do you do that and not have some of these issues? A lot of this stuff about, Carter needed to talk to his mental coach and TK had a baby and all. Like, you know what? I realize that is a factor, but you're a professional hockey player and there has to be a mechanism for dealing that. And there has to be an outlet for this. If there are problems with this, and there's all this talk about like emotional intelligence and sports psychology, and the more mental side of the game is more appreciated, and they seem to attend to these needs more than they ever have. I just think the problem with the Flyers is cultural. They're not used to a certain standard. So when you keep falling short, because I don't think the expectation has been led by example. It's one thing to say, like Eagles, when they had Deshaun Jackson and Michael Vick, would always talk during training camp about how this guy is the best player. This is the best offense we've had. We're going to win so many games this year. But when they never did anything, and when you've never done it, and you don't have that template right in front of you based on accomplishment, not deeds, not words, I think a lot of these situations arise, and I think the team is more susceptible to having situations where the players, they wander, they don't have consistent performance, and you wonder about the things that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's all we can do is speculate because there's no set answers, but you just see the performance on the ice over the last many, many years, and it's just something just doesn't add up because while I do agree that they haven't had the most talented teams, I think that if you look at the true talent on this roster for the last 10 years and what their record has been, probably they've underachieved greatly would be sort of my guess. And it's, I don't know. And I have no problems. Again, we've talked about this. I have no problems with Chuck Fletcher and what he's done. I think that, the first offseason he was here, he saw a bunch of holes that needed to be filled. He went out, he got Niskanen, he got Braun, he signed Kevin Hayes. I think he was a man of action that offseason. The following offseason, it was kind of hard to tell whether or not this team was was headed the right direction or not. They were so good before the COVID break, and then they were so good in the round robin in the bubble, and then they were not very good in the playoffs after that, but they still advanced a few rounds. And so they didn't make many moves that offseason. This past offseason, Fletcher knew there had to be a ton of moves made, and he made a ton of moves. Not necessarily his fault that the Ryan Ellis situation has happened like it has. Obviously, he's an injury-prone player, and that's been there in the past, but I think that deal was just too good to pass up. Getting rid of Patrick and only having also to give up Phil Myers and getting Ellis, I just think was too good to pass up, and so I don't really blame him for making that deal. And the injuries, but I don't have any issues with what Chuck Fletcher has done. And some people on Twitter have sort of asked me or questioned out loud, like, is Chuck Fletcher the guy to lead a rebuild? And I think a lot of people think the answer to that is no. But for me, I can't say definitively no, because I'm not sure that Chuck Fletcher has ever had to engineer a rebuild, at least not after he was with the Wild for a while. That's kind of his first GM gig. I think you learn from things. This is kind of his second real go-around. I'm not sure he could be the guy to engineer a rebuild. I'm just not sure if the organization is going to let him do something like that.
I mean, I think that's the bigger question. I mean, what had Paul Holmgren done up when he took over for Bob Clark? I mean, he had I think he had been a GM elsewhere. I'm not sure. I know he'd been a coach. But really, he hadn't shown that he could build an organization. So what did he do? He went out and made the trades to get Upshaw. He got Braden Coburn. I mean, we all remember the excitement coming off the worst season in team history. And, of course, really started with Timo and Scott Hartnell, and then he signs Danny Briere. He got a whole new team. The thing was that they had Richards and Carter in tow. What they lacked is a goalie. So the Flyers have the goalie, like you were saying earlier, and you just know where we're going. I mean, some of the players, Oscar Lindblom is showing a little life. He had 3 goals, 4 assists in December. So he still has some down games, but you see more of the old Oscar. I don't know if we're ever going to see the Oscar that was really like their goal scoring leader in the brief period before he had to go out with the cancer diagnosis. And, it's it's hard to say with Couturier out of the lineup, who's been over the last 5 years, probably overall their best two-way player, the most important player, and having him out and probably addled before then and not 100%, but it still doesn't add up to me to a team that's going anywhere. So like you said, they have some games coming up. The trip can be made or broken in the eyes of some. With the Anaheim game coming up tomorrow, they have a couple guys on COVID protocol. So we'll have to see, waiting on tenterhooks, pins and needles about what's going to happen with that game and another late game that we can all stay up. Maybe put it on DVR.
Maybe. I mean, I watched the Sharks game. I watched the, what were the other games? I don't know. I watched the Sharks game. I watched the Kraken game. I made it through like a period and a half of that Kings game, and I was like, you know what? I've got better things to do with my life right now than watch this train wreck of a hockey team. I know how this one's going to end. I caught
the rest of it on DVR. I saw the first period and then a little into the second period, and I said, I'll catch it tomorrow morning. And I was like, it was like force feeding. It's like really stale toast or something. I don't know. In the morning. But I just feel like, if we're going to do a podcast, I want to catch any moment of glimmer of hope or yet another example of a total ineptitude. Look, it's not 06, 07, and it's not. But I think if they don't make the playoffs this year, regardless of everything that's happened, the injuries and all that, it's every bit as bad as last year. And the only resolution to it is it's not going to work. We have to start talking about the things you mentioned earlier with Giroux and all that. So,
yeah, I think in many ways, for me, it's a worse situation than last year because now we've got Sean Couturier locked up, for the next zillion years at that big contract that he's going to have, and we've got Cam Atkinson locked up, and we've got we had Voracek locked up anyway, but we've got Kevin Hayes locked up and Ryan Ellis. So In some ways it's going to be harder to make moves this offseason than it was last offseason.
Did you get a chance to see the Winter Classic?
I did not. I did not get a chance to see the Winter Classic.
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't see all of it. There were like 5 things on at that time. There was boxing. There was college football. There was a Phantoms game I was watching, which I gave in on that. I couldn't watch all at the same time. I had multiple things going on with the DVR. It was a nice presentation. At one point, and it probably went down below that, it was so cold. It was -9. And the guys had all this stuff they were rubbing on their faces, even though in their ears, I would imagine their ears were killing them. And it was at, I think it was Target Field, the baseball field where the Twins played. And St. Louis just came out, just jumped all over them. And then Minnesota made a nice charge at the end, but St. Louis hung on for 6-4 victory. There were some snafus and some things that TNT didn't do very well. But listen, it's just a game. It was a little weird without Doc Emmerich. But, yeah, I think they did a good job, especially under the COVID threat, and to get it in and have that tradition maintained.
Yeah, no, it's a fun spectacle on TV. I will say I've gone to 3 of those outdoor games. And to me, hockey's kind of much better sport to watch indoors because of all the noise. The crowd feels a lot louder when you're indoors. In general, I like indoor sporting events better than outdoor because of the noise and how kind of the atmosphere feels a lot more. It feels like a lot more of an intimate atmosphere than the outdoor games. So I like watching them. I think watching those games on TV is better than actually being at those outdoor games. Yeah,
I mean the comfort level too. I mean just. In baseball games, it's hot and there's bees flying around and things like that. And like you said, it's loud. The arenas, you're definitely more comfortable. There's no doubt about that. So, yeah, that was an event. Speaking of an event, there's just a couple things before we roll. At least there is some other good news. I just mentioned Joel Farabee, 6 goals, last 8 games. That had 30 goals in his last 80 games. Probably the most consistent performer after Claude Giroux. Who 600th assist, 884th point, passing Bill Barber to move into second place in the Flyers' all-time point list. He's quite a bit behind Bob Clark, but still, that is quite a milestone. Playing in an era where the goaltending, has clearly been better than what Bill Barber had to do with.
Yeah, it's a great accomplishment for Claude Giroux, and no matter how this era of Flyers hockey is going to be remembered, Giroux will always be remembered as the top dog during this generation for Flyers fans. And to see him get that record is very impressive. I mean, no one is ever going to question Claude Giroux's talent level. They're not going to question his compete ability. He's been a fantastic player for this franchise for a long time, and we'll see what happens with him at the end of the season. If he, if this team continues to play poorly and he waives his no move clause, and if they move him, that's going to be the story the rest of this season. Is barring some kind of big winning streak, the question is going to be, okay, this team is probably not going to make the playoffs. So what are you going to do with Claude Giroux? Do they approach him about waiving his no movement clause? Have they already done it? Because he's played his whole career here. So now the question is, all right, he's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. Is he going to want to come back here? Is he prioritizing winning a cup somewhere else? Like what is, and I don't think anyone knows that except for Claude Giroux and maybe his wife. What's going on in his head, right? Does he want to come back? Does he feel loyalty to this franchise? I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see how this whole thing plays out.
Frankly, Dan, I think that's really the intrigue for the season. We can say that, I can't wait to see Ryan Ellis again, just to watch him play and see what could have been and what may be next year. I'm past that. I have given up on the idea that this team, as currently constructed, with the core pieces as they are, is ever going to do anything. And I'm ready to move on. I think we all pretty much agree. And you see that with the Bags, the Bag Nation and things like that. So it is going to be, is it going to be bye-bye time for Claude Giroux, and we're going to have the sentimentality that they had in Calgary for Jerome Iginla, a situation I think is somewhat analogous. Iginla is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't think Claude Giroux is quite in that category. I think he's got a very good chance of making that. And it would improve if he was sent to a team where he won a cup and was a valuable contributor. And at this point, for the interests of both sides, I'd like to see that happen. I wanted to move on from Claude Giroux a couple of years ago because I just didn't see it happening. And then we had, we were waiting for Nolan Patrick to come in. And if Nolan Patrick kicks in and all of a sudden they have a second line center who's productive and could be what we thought Nolan Patrick could be, well, maybe that's a revitalizer. And maybe then the heart kicks in and everything starts looking better. Well, that's all fall into pieces, all fall into shit. So it's where we're at,
Yeah, it's where we're at. I agree. I'm not sure if Giroux would be a Hall of Famer, but it is. I think I would love to see him get moved, both for him and for the team. I'd love to see him go somewhere and win a Stanley Cup. I mean, I'd love to see the Flyers basically eat all of his salary for this year, trade him somewhere, and that'll help out. There's not many teams who can take on his full salary, right, for the rest of the year. So you're probably going to have to eat his entire salary for the rest of the year, trade him somewhere, maybe you can get a first-round pick and a prospect out of it. Seems like a good deal for the Flyers and good deal for Giroux, maybe go and win a championship. And then I know this rarely happens, but if he really wants to finish his career here, then, maybe he re-signs here in the offseason after getting traded somewhere else at the deadline.
Yeah, we're having some technical issues here. I don't know what the deal is. So, we'll find. I mean, there's a big drama coming up with Claude Giroux. So we're gonna look back at another show at the calendar year 2021. Let's get to that next time because we are having some technical issues. Sorry about that. And we'll talk a little bit about that Couturier contract next time as well, because that has the ability to be an 8-year revenge tour. Whether it's meant that way or not, it could end up being that way. That's another big decision they have coming up. So, all right. So Tuesday night, Anaheim at home versus Pittsburgh, at home versus San Jose, and then a couple days off. Then at home versus Carolina, at Boston, New York Rangers at some point on a Saturday the 15th after the Boston game. And somewhere in there, we'll have another show. And with that, Dan, why don't we wrap it up? Why don't you give your contact information and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so folks can find me on Twitter at dsilver88, the 88 for Eric Lindros. And at dsilver88, look me up and throw me a follow.
You got it. You can follow me at Isaiah, ISAIAH _520. Isaiah, don't forget the underscore 520. And of course, follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck and all the other stuff we talked about in the very beginning. So until next time, everybody, probably after these next 3 games, we'll catch up with you again. Until then, take care.